Hey everyone, and welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about coffee and its effects on the brain.
Yeah, it's something a lot of people enjoy every day.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know I really need my coffee in the mornings.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of our listeners do too.
No, absolutely. But it's not just about that energy boost. There's actually a lot of research out there about how coffee affects our brains.
Really? Like what kind of stuff?
Well, some studies have shown that coffee might actually protect against some pretty serious brain conditions,
Oh wow. Like what?
like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease.
That's amazing. I mean,
Ah,
those are some pretty serious diseases. So to think that something as simple as coffee could help protect against them is really incredible.
yeah, it is. And it's not just about preventing those specific diseases either. There's also research suggesting that coffee can improve other aspects of brain function.
Really? Like what?
Well, one study found that caffeine, which is the main active ingredient in coffee, can actually improve reaction time by about 10%.
10%. That's a pretty
Yeah.
significant improvement.
Yeah, it is. And it's not just about feeling more alert either. It seems like caffeine can actually enhance things like memory learning and even overall mental performance.
Wow. So coffee isn't just a pick-me-up, it's like a brain booster.
In a way, yes,
Yeah.
but like with anything, moderation is key.
Yeah, that makes sense. I have a feeling too much coffee can't be a good thing.
You're right. There was one study that found that people who drank more than 6 cups of coffee a day actually had smaller brain volumes.
Smaller brain volumes.
Yeah. And they also had an increased risk of dementia.
Oh, wow. That's a little scary. So how much coffee is too much?
Well, it's different for everyone, but I think it's important to be aware of how your body reacts to caffeine. If you're feeling anxious, jittery, or having trouble sleeping, it might be a sign that you need to cut back.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Hmm.
I mean, I know I get the jitters if I drink too much coffee, so I
Yeah.
definitely try to be mindful of how much I'm drinking.
And it's not just about how much coffee you drink, it's also about when you drink it.
Oh, yeah. Like drinking coffee too late in the day can mess with your sleep.
Exactly. Caffeine can stay in your system for several hours, so even if you don't feel like it's keeping you awake, it can still affect the quality of your sleep.
Okay. So maybe no more late night coffee for me.
Probably a good idea. Now, another interesting thing about coffee is that it can actually change the structure of your brain.
Wait, really? How is that even possible?
Well, there was a study that found that drinking the caffeine equivalent of a daily cup of coffee for 10 days actually led to a decrease in gray matter volume in certain areas of the brain.
Gray matter. What is that?
Gray matter is basically the information processing center of your brain. It's involved in things like memory, muscle control, and sensory perception.
Okay, so it's pretty important stuff. And coffee can actually change the volume of that.
Yeah, it seems so.
Wow. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It is, but before you get too worried, the researchers also found that these changes were reversible.
Reversible. So if you stop drinking coffee, your brain goes back to normal.
Yeah. After 10 days of abstaining from caffeine, the participants' gray matter volume returned to normal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know. I was starting to think I needed to give up coffee altogether.
No, you don't have to give it up. Just be mindful of how much you're drinking and listen to your body.
Good advice. So, we've talked about how coffee can protect against brain diseases, improve brain function, and even change the structure of our brains. But what about memory? Does coffee help us remember things better?
That's a good question. And the research on that is a little mixed.
Mixed. How so?
Well, some studies have shown that caffeine can improve both short-term and long-term memory, but other studies haven't found any effect, or have even found that caffeine can impair memory.
So it's not really clear whether coffee is good or bad for memory.
Yeah. It seems like it really depends on the individual. And there are probably a lot of factors at play, like genetics, metabolism, and even the type of memory being tested.
Wow. This is all so fascinating. I had no idea coffee was so complex.
It is. And we've only just scratched the surface.
I know, right? I'm already learning so much.
And there's still more to come.
Can't wait. So tell me, what else is there to know about coffee and the brain?
Well, one thing that's important to remember is that it's not just about the caffeine. Coffee actually contains a variety of other beneficial compounds,
Oh, really? Like what?
like antioxidants, for example.
Antioxidants. Those are good for you, right?
Yes, they help protect your cells from damage.
So coffee is like a health drink.
Well, I wouldn't go that far, but it definitely has some health benefits, in addition to the caffeine.
That's cool. So what kind of antioxidants are in coffee?
One type is called chlorogenic acids.
Chlorogenic acids.
Yeah. They've been linked to some potential benefits for blood sugar metabolism and blood pressure regulation.
Wow. So coffee could be good for our hearts, too.
There's some promising research in that area. but more research is needed to confirm those findings.
Makes sense. So coffee has antioxidants.
Yeah.
And it might be good for our hearts. What else?
Well, coffee also contains two compounds called caffeine and caffeine.
Caffeine and caffeine. What are those?
They're mainly found in unfiltered coffee, like the kind you'd get from a French press.
Ah, the French press. I love French press coffee.
Me too, but it's worth noting that those oils, caffeine and caffeine, can potentially raise cholesterol levels in some people.
Oh, so maybe not an everyday brewing method for those watching their cholesterol.
It's something to consider.
Okay, good to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Now, I have a question about something you mentioned earlier. You said that coffee can improve reaction time by 10%, but I've always heard that darker roasts have more caffeine. So wouldn't a dark roast give you a bigger boost?
That's a common misconception, but it's actually the opposite. The roasting process burns off some of the caffeine. So lighter roasts tend to have slightly more caffeine than darker roasts.
Oh, really? I had no idea. So it's not about how dark the roast is, it's about the quality of the beans.
Exactly. And speaking of quality, that's another important factor to consider when it comes to coffee and its effects on your brain.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, just like with anything else, the quality of your coffee can make a big difference.
Okay, so what should I be looking for when choosing coffee?
Well, one thing to consider is the origin of the beans. Different regions produce beans with unique flavor profiles, just like wine.
Interesting. So I should be paying attention to where my coffee comes from.
Definitely. And you should also pay attention to the roasting date. You want to buy coffee that's been roasted recently, because the flavor starts to deteriorate after a few weeks.
Okay, so fresh is best.
Exactly. And another thing to consider is the brewing method. Different brewing methods extract different flavors from the beans.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed that. I mean, French press coffee definitely tastes different from drip coffee.
Yeah. That's because the French press uses a coarser grind and a longer brewing time, which extracts more of the oils from the beans.
I see. So the brewing method can really affect the taste of the coffee.
Absolutely. And it can also affect the amount of caffeine that's extracted.
Oh, wow. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to coffee.
There is, but it's all part of the fun. I mean, coffee is a beverage that you can really experiment with, and there's so many different ways to enjoy it.
I know, it's like a whole world unto itself.
It is, and it's a world that's worth exploring.
Definitely. Well, I think this is a good place to take a break. We've covered a lot of ground already, and I'm sure our listeners are eager to hear more about coffee and its effects on the brain.
Me too. I'm looking forward to delving deeper into some of the research.
Great. We'll be back soon with more on coffee and the brain.
All right, so where were we?
We were talking about all the amazing things coffee can do for our brains.
Oh, right. Like how it might protect against Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Yeah, that was pretty mind-blowing. I
Yeah.
mean, to think that something as simple as coffee could help ward off those kinds of diseases.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot we still don't know.
Like what?
Well, for one thing, most of the studies that have been done on coffee and brain health have been observational.
Observational.
Yeah, which means they can't prove cause and effect.
I'll see.
So, while the research is definitely promising, we need more studies, especially randomized controlled trials, to really confirm these findings.
That makes sense. But still, it's pretty exciting stuff.
It is. And it's not just about those two diseases either. There's also some evidence that coffee might be good for other aspects of brain health.
Really? Like what?
Well, for example, some studies have shown that coffee drinkers have a lower risk of stroke.
Oh, wow. That's huge.
It is. And there's also some evidence that coffee might help protect against age-related cognitive decline.
So, drinking coffee could help keep our brains sharp as we get older.
Potentially, yeah.
That's amazing. But,
Yeah.
like you said before, moderation is key, right?
Absolutely. Too much of anything can be bad for you, and coffee is no exception.
Right. So, how much coffee is too much?
Well, the general recommendation is to limit your caffeine intake to about 400 milligrams per day.
400 milligrams. How much coffee is that?
It's about 4 or 5 cups of coffee.
Okay. So,
Yeah.
as long as I stay under that limit,
Mhm.
should be good.
Well, it's not quite that simple. Everyone's tolerance to caffeine is different.
Oh, right. Like some people are more sensitive than others.
Exactly. So it's important to pay attention to how your body reacts to caffeine. If you're feeling jittery anxious or having trouble sleeping, it might be a sign that you need to cut back.
Yeah, I definitely know the feeling. I've had one too many cups of coffee before, and it's not fun.
No, it's not.
So,
Mm.
what are some other things we should know about caffeine?
Well, one thing that's important to keep in mind is that caffeine is a stimulant.
Right, it gives you energy.
Exactly, and that's why it can be so helpful in the morning or when you need a pick-me-up.
But too much caffeine can be a bad thing, right?
Right. It can lead to anxiety, insomnia, and even heart palpitations.
Wow, that's serious.
It can be. So it's important to be mindful of your caffeine intake.
Okay, I will.
Yeah.
So, what else is there to know about coffee and caffeine?
Well, one thing that's interesting is that caffeine can actually affect your sleep.
Even if you don't drink it right before bed.
Yeah. Caffeine can stay in your system for several hours, so even if you don't feel like it's keeping you awake, it can still disrupt your sleep cycle.
Oh, wow. I had no idea.
And, it's not just about how much caffeine you consume, it's also about when you consume it.
Oh, yeah. Like, what do you mean?
Well, studies have shown that drinking coffee in the evening can shift your circadian rhythm.
Circadian rhythm.
Yeah, it's basically your body's natural sleep-wake cycle.
Oh, I see.
So, if you drink coffee late in the day, it can make it harder to fall asleep at night.
Okay. So maybe no more coffee after dinner.
Probably a good idea.
And you know what? Speaking of sleep, I'm actually starting to feel a little sleepy myself. All this talk about coffee is making me want to take a nap.
Well, maybe we should take a break and come back to this later.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Oh.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and I think we all need a little caffeine boost.
Sounds good to me.
All right, so we're back. And I have to say, I'm really enjoying this deep dive into coffee.
Yeah, me too. It's fascinating to learn about all the different ways it can affect our brains.
It is. I mean, who knew there was so much to know about coffee?
Right. It's not just a simple drink. It's a complex beverage with a lot of different compounds that can interact with our bodies in all sorts of ways.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes it so interesting. There's always more to learn.
Absolutely.
So now that we've talked about some of the potential benefits and downsides of coffee, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on
Well,
what does this all mean? Like, what are the key takeaways for our listeners?
that's a good question. I think one of the biggest takeaways is that coffee is a powerful substance.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
we've seen how it can affect everything from our mood to our memory to our risk of developing certain diseases.
Right. So it's important to be respectful of that power
Mm-hmm.
and to use it wisely.
Okay. So how do we use coffee wisely?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to be mindful of how much coffee you're drinking.
Yeah. Like we talked about before, too much caffeine can be a bad thing.
Exactly. So it's important to find that sweet spot where you're getting the benefits without the negative side effects.
Okay. What else?
Well, another important thing is to pay attention to the quality of your coffee.
Yeah. We talked about that a little bit earlier.
Right. But it's worth repeating because the quality of your coffee can really make a difference in how it affects your body.
Okay. So what should we be looking for when choosing coffee?
Well, there are a few things to keep in mind. First, you want to make sure you're buying fresh coffee beans because the flavor and aroma start to deteriorate after a few weeks.
Okay. So no more stale coffee.
Right. Second, you want to choose beans that have been roasted properly because the roasting process can really affect the flavor of the coffee.
I see. So there's an art to roasting coffee beans.
There is. And finally, you want to grind your beans fresh before brewing because pre-ground coffee loses its flavor more quickly.
Okay. So fresh beans, fresh roast, fresh grind.
Exactly.
Got it. Anything else?
Well, I think it's also important to experiment with different brewing methods because different methods extract different flavors from the beans.
Yeah. Like we talked about before, French press coffee tastes different from drip coffee.
Right. So it's fun to try different methods and see which one you like best.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So to sum it all up, coffee can be a powerful tool for boosting brain health, but it's important to use it wisely. Be mindful of how much you're drinking. Pay attention to the quality of your coffee. And experiment with different brewing methods.
Exactly.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into coffee and the brain.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.
And to all our listeners out there, keep those brains buzzing.